All right, everyone. This will be a short and sweet presentation today, going over the three readings for this week. So first, I will cover what was in Socioculturally Attuned Family Therapy, our textbook for this week. So the one of the goals of your time in at Alliant and your time in your master's is to become a socioculturally attuned therapist. So ultimately, in this chapter, the authors introduce they introduce what is socioculturally attuned therapy. And this is a framework that goes beyond traditional therapy models. It asks you to recognize and confront systemic inequities, power, and privilege. So, you, as the therapist, are called to consistently reflect on your own position and role in reinforcing or challenging oppression. So ultimately here you're asked to examine your own biases. So one of the experiences that you will have throughout your time in your master's and hopefully beyond is learning some stuff about yourself that you may not be super proud of, or recognizing biases or stereotypes that you have internalized that you didn't realize were there. So my hope is that you are very gracious with yourself, and you really lean into the learning of this process. So, with sociocultural attunement, this also centers the lived experiences of marginalized clients. So, remember, social location is made up of like 15 different kind of characteristics, 15 plus. It's always kind of growing as we further understand the complexity of humans. But when we talk about marginalized clients, we tend to go right to things like race or sexual orientation or ability status. Remember that marginalization happens in all kinds of different social positions or social locations. Okay, some key principles of sociocultural attunement. It is focused in equity. So remember, equity is not the same as equality. Equality kind of blanketly states everyone should have the same thing, access to the same thing. And equity is much more personalized on the basis of need, on the basis of social location or socialization. So equity is what that specific person needs or what would be supportive for that specific person. And accountability, that's your accountability. If you mess up, if you have a moment where you realize that you just stuck your foot in your mouth, that you put voice to it, you have humility, you bring it in the room. Because sociocultural attunement is also about recognizing power in the room, that we as therapists have inherent power, naming that, being aware of that, while also working to try to balance it as much as possible. So again, you're not the expert. It's also not like the customer's always right kind of a thing. So it's a both and, where you're balancing power in the room with your client. It also is about refusing to silo identities. So again, identities such as race, gender, sexuality, and class, they all intersect. That's what intersectionalism is. And they affect the client's life in different ways. So, for example, a white able-bodied woman, and I'm only taking like two identities here, has a different experience than a white disabled woman. So understanding that on the surface things may look the same, you may have some assumptions about their lived experience, but recognizing that each individual part of our identity intersects with others like a web to make our unique identity. And also that the last piece here is that sociocultural attunement has a commitment to broader social and systemic change and justice. So what is your role? We are advocates and allies, co-conspirators, disruptors, whatever things that you what you want to identify it. And this is rather than just a neutral observer. Therapy is not neutral. Therapy is inherently political. We'll talk a lot about that when we get to feminist family therapy. When this chapter also highlighted the importance of self-reflection and awareness of personal biases, neutrality is seen as complicit in maintaining systemic oppression, so therapists in must engage actively in social justice. So it's challenging that traditional neutrality. Some of the language that was likely used in the theories that you learned in theories one, which again doesn't make them bad. They're beautiful theories. They're the foundation of our field. And they were created in a time where social location, social justice, justice, equity, inclusion, diversity, they weren't really at the forefront. So some implications for practice regarding being socioculturally attuned is integrating sociocultural awareness into therapy. So again, your socio is just like your way you've been socialized, your social location. Cultural is everything that kind of makes you you. So remember, culture isn't just like a country of origin, it isn't just a race or an ethnicity. I'm just thinking, I'm sitting here in my, Michigan home. There's a culture in Michigan, a Midwestern culture. And culture isn't always like a space either. So I don't want it to look like that either. But there's a different culture in Michigan than there is in California. So just kind of also challenging and broadening your understanding or your definition of what is culture. Marginalized voices are empowered by validating their lived experiences, and also that we as therapists become social agents of change. So we're working both within sessions and in broader advocacy efforts, and that can look a lot of different ways depending on what lane you want to occupy. So that's very briefly about our text. So then we also read the Carlson and Erickson article on recapturing the person in the therapist. So here this focuses a lot on person of the therapist training and how it emphasizes self-awareness. So it's a teaching modality. Again, it's a way of being, which will be a theme this semester in this class. It is understanding how you have come to believe what you believe, how you've come to be who you are, and potentially challenging some of those that could be harmful or dehumanizing to clients. So, Carlson and Erickson argue that therapy is more than just techniques. It requires awareness of our beliefs, values, and our ethics. And it encourages authenticity and integration of personal and professional lives. So one of the things that I notice a lot in beginning therapists is that they they feel like they have to be professional, like that they have to like put on a professional hat, that they have to be different in the room than how they just are in their everyday lives. And I will say, on a personal note, that there are some differences. So, for example, like I am interested in my clients' stories. I find I ask questions. I'm invested in a way that I'm not invested in my everyday life. Like I don't have to have my therapist ears on all the time, because that would be very taxing, and it's not sustainable. At the same time, who I am as a professor, as a friend, as a therapist, as a mom, as a wife, they are all very similar to one another. So just understanding that you don't have to be different in the room. Part of the beauty and the growth in this field in your development as a therapist is realizing like how you are now is wonderful, and it's perfectly professional enough to show up in the room. So, sometimes I'll see students even like sitting different, or they talk different, they have a different cadence, or they articulate in a different way. And just so you know, that's totally developmentally normal. And it's not necessary. And you'll hopefully, drop that as you continue in this field. So person of the therapist training encourages exploration of your own history and experiences, and again, how they inform who you are today. As I said before, it promotes an integration of personal dimensions into therapy. So who you are as a human being, who you are on the everyday is who you are also in the room. And the hope in that, the goal in that is building authenticity. So you don't feel like you have to like code switch or be different in the room than you are, because that authenticity builds a relational presence and it builds a safe, trusting environment. I'm guessing that if at the end of this class you found out that I was a completely different person who believed different things than what I was teaching you, that would probably sour what you've been learning. So, be who you are in the room. So your personal theoretical orientation, this is what the authors emphasize as important to develop. This essentially means integrating what you learn from the formal models that you learned in theories one, that you will be learning here in theories two, with your own values, cultural influences, and experiences. So ultimately, you're going to find the theories that you resonate with likely very much align with how you think humans function, how you think relationships work, what you believe about the human experience. So it's another layer of integration. So even family therapy is not without its built-in values. That was probably became pretty clear in theories one. So as therapists, we need to explore these values and determine if they align with our own commitments. And this also is a reflection that ensures an ethical practice. So for example, like I think of structural family therapy. There's a belief that the parents or caregivers should be in that executive subsystem, that children are essentially kind of like a level below in that sibling or child subsystem, and that if there's an imbalance, that's what contributes to dysfunction or stress, maladaptation. So that is a built-in value of that approach. And I mean, what you'll be learning in your diversity course, if you haven't taken it, is that family therapy as a field is pretty ethnocentric. And very much can be rooted in what would be considered like white ideals or white values. So the field at large is criticized for that within it. So again, the approaches that we'll be learning this semester have been key in some of the, challenging and the hope of like dismantling some of those problematic assumptions of like what is a good family or a functional family, what a family should look like. So I digress, but that's just a piece of this. Okay, so your stance. So which essentially is just like how you show up in session. That's what when I say positionality, that's also what that means is how you come into the room. And that means what you believe, how you ask questions, how you engage, how you relate. This is deeply influenced by our beliefs about power, responsibility, and ethics. So an ongoing reflection helps maintain integrity in therapeutic practice. We have to be aware of what we believe, and we have to be accountable to that and accountable to the process of challenging some of those. So they also offer some practical activities that you could engage in. So these are, writing exercises, discussions, reflections, ultimately to help you become more aware of your values, ethical stance, your session practice. But one is to articulate your personal values and commitments. What are your values? What are you committed to? What's important to you? What are the ethical dimensions of the theories? So this necessitates a deeper understanding of the theories that you choose to practice than what you've been presented with in your master's program. Like we'll be covering, for example, narrative therapy for 2 classes. You will get like 3 hours of lecture total on narrative therapy that won't make you a well-rounded, deeply understanding narrative therapist. You don't have, and you also don't have to like marry an approach. You don't have to identify deeply with one. And when you find yourself leaning toward theories, I really encourage you to do some deep dives on what are the theoretical underpinnings, what is the history of these approaches, and they can help you just, again, better understand the ethical dimensions. Um, Reflect on your own positioning in therapy sessions. How active are you? What do you believe your role is? How do you view dysfunction, maladaptation? How do you view these things? How do you define them? And are they imposed on the client? And also, Personal the Therapist encourages continuous personal growth. One of the things that I really appreciate about being faculty is that I get to continue to challenge some of my viewpoints, better understand myself through y'all and through the tapes that you bring, through the questions that you ask, through your positionalities, and being reflexive on how that informs me and how I see the world, what my perception of the world is. So just wanting to show some gratitude to how much students challenge us as faculty too, in a beautiful way. So, this article concludes with reminding us that therapy is never just about models or skills. It's our values that shape the work that we do. It's very personal. We have a faculty in Los Angeles, Dr. Iman Dadras, who talks about being a psychometrician. And that ultimately means trying to be a robot in the room and just deliver perfect interventions. Not believing that my values affect the work that I do. As long as I just deliver the intervention, it doesn't matter what I believe. And if you're in that place, I really challenge you to think about that, because you have a history, you have a rich history. The vast majority of you have at least 25 years on this planet. It's not that long, but it's enough to mold some views. So really understanding who am I as a person and how does that influence my professional identity. And then the integration of personal beliefs enhances therapeutic effectiveness. Like I said before, if you are authentic, show up honestly in the room, that will build trust, that will build a stronger therapeutic alliance, a stronger rapport. Okay, so then the last article that we read was, Does the Person of the Therapist training promote self-care? And this was written by one of our faculty, Dr. Nino, who's here in the online campus, along with her colleague, Dr. Kissel. So ultimately, here, the intro to this is that therapy is emotionally taxing, self-care is essential. So, also, for what it's worth, self-care in many ways is tough in a flawed system like therapy. Um, we are generally overworked, generally underpaid. Mental health is not a value largely in at least the United States. So we're working in a system that isn't really valued. So you can't, I guess in some ways what I'm saying is like you can't always self-care your way out of a broken system. So just keep that in mind. Like if you can't, you don't, I don't ever want this to become of like, oh, I'm still experiencing burnout. Am I doing self-care wrong? It's like, no, you're in a system that you it's like David and Goliath. So I'm not here, hopefully that doesn't like discourage any of you. I just want to be very honest about the reality of what you can do in this field in terms of maintaining resilience, being able to sustain. But ultimately, this study explored whether Person of the Therapist promotes self-care among MFT trainees. And the focus of the study and like the analyses were on identity growth and relational changes. So they used thematic analysis to analyze interviews done with MFT trainees who had completed the person of the therapist training. And this focused on personal rather than professional outcomes. So they're wanting to understand. So, person of the therapist is training is to try to help you become a better therapist. And I think a byproduct of that is that you become a more grounded human in it because there's a lot of acceptance of where you've been, a lot of leaning into your own authenticity, your own identity as a wounded healer, that we've all been through stuff. So wanting to see, okay, let's explicitly explore what might be some personal changes that can happen. So ultimately, what they found were four themes: a better understanding of self, changes to self, relational changes, and change as a process. So going into each of these themes a little bit more deeply. Better understanding of self. So this resulted in a deeper self-awareness, again, of stereotypes, internalized biases, how your history affects you, just general insights about yourself, a recognition of vulnerabilities. These are largely emotional vulnerabilities. What activates you, what might trigger you if have diagnosed with something like PTSD, and then connecting your personal history with therapeutic work. So, how has your own kind of pilgrimage, your own journey, how does that relate to those of your clients? How does that shared human experience affect you and the therapeutic work that you do? The second theme, changes to self. So they found that the students were more engaged in emotional healing and growth, that they saw themselves differently, that they were less critical of themselves. They had greater empathy towards self and others, and a greater sense of authenticity, that I have permission. I can show up as my own self because I am good enough. Um, it's okay for me to show up as I am. There's nothing, I'm like working on shame or, parts of self that they would rather not have others see. Personal therapist is a very vulnerable type of training that really tries to kind of peel away the layers of the onion. The third theme, relational changes. So they found positive shifts in their relationship, so improved family and peer relationships. These were both personal and professional. And this happened through having better communication skills, maybe asserting self, having some more assertive communication, and better boundary setting. So, having a boundary, recognizing it and maintaining it. Because I'm going a little bit off here, but just a reminder that boundaries are like fence gates. They're meant to help maintain a relationship, not shut someone out. So sometimes when people hear boundary, they think, oh my gosh, I'm being cut off, or this means that they don't want to talk with this person anymore. And really, boundaries are meant to try to sustain relationships in a healthy way. So, I'll take like my sister, for example. One of my personal boundaries with her that she doesn't necessarily know is that I don't really share super vulnerable information with her, because I've learned over the years that she doesn't really know what to do with it. And sometimes she may mention it in a joking way when it's pretty hurtful. So, in order for me to maintain as close of a relationship that feels safe to me, I don't share super vulnerable things with her. Again, in an attempt to maintain our relationship. It's not necessarily a compromise. Boundary setting is kind of learning what other people's capacities are and how you can show up in a way that still feels safe and connected to you, but not that you're not so open that you leave yourself open to maybe being hurt. And then the last theme was change as a process. So this is not a one-time event. Change is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. It's iterative, meaning that you go through the process, you learn something, and then you start back at the top of the process. It's just iterative just means like over again. It the students they embraced vulnerability. And they were able to build resilience, emotional resilience over time, relational resilience. So ultimately, person of the therapist enhance they found that person of the therapy training enhances both professional and personal well-being. It does encourage self-care practices such as boundary setting, such as assertive communication. So self-care doesn't just mean like bubble baths and massages. It means being able to show up authentically and from a values-based place where you're like proud and feel good about how you're showing up. And then at the what they ultimately recommend is integrating person of the therapist training into MFT programs, which is exactly what we do here at Alliant. So that is our lecture for this week.